Okay, welcome to a quick tutorial on VMC and VMG. VMC is a velocity made course, on course, or to course, and VMG is velocity made good. You will find them in your GPS tab. And just very quickly, before I get on into the details, what are the big differences? Well, at present, wait a second, let me just bear away a little. Okay, so our velocity made good is really about finding the optimum speed to either a direct upwind or downwind path. So in this case here, the direct upwind path is on our TWD here, and you will notice that both our VMC and our VMG are very, very similar. Why is that? It's because our waypoint is also pointing in the same upwind direction. If I move my bearing to waypoint away, let's put it directly on where I'm pointing anyway, now we will notice that my VMC and my VMG are slightly different. If I move even further away, let's move it up here, and let me point even further. You will note now that the VMC, okay, because I'm pointing directly towards, or I'm bearing towards my waypoint, I'm basically getting pretty good VMC. My VMG, however, has dropped considerably. Why is that? Because I'm not heading in a directly upwind course. I'm not heading towards there. So that's the basic concept. Now let's get into all of the different details that you need to know to be able to calculate or think about what this is. Let's first talk about our boat speed as compared to our speed over ground. This is different here. Why is it different? Well, our speed through the water is 0 at the moment because we are anchored. But our speed over ground is 0.1 of a knot. Why is this? Well, it's because our current direction, current being the action of the waves and water, is pushing back against the boat, leading to our course over ground, which is in this direction, okay, heading south. So that's the difference there. Let me talk about that a little bit different with some diagrams. Okay, so let's look at 3 different scenarios here. I'm using this guy's website. And in the first instance, there's no wind and no current, and so our speed is 15 knots, and our speed over ground is 15 knots, because nothing is affecting the boat speed. In the second example here, the current is 2 knots against us. So if we traveled again, our speed over water is 15 knots, but our speed over the ground is only 13 knots. So instead of traveling 15 nautical miles this time in an hour, we only travel 13 nautical miles. And in the third instance here, we have 2 knot current, which is behind us. And in this case, obviously, our speed over the water is 15 knots, okay? But our speed over the ground is 17 knots, because we get that additional 2 knots in current. So why is this important, this difference between boat speed and speed over ground? Well, for our VMG we use boat speed, whereas for our VMC we use speed over ground. I'll come back to the calculations in a while and explain the differences between all these numbers, but that was the first concept you needed to learn. Now let's move on to some polar diagrams. So let's look at the a real polar chart for a Mini Transat 650 6.50, and what this is showing is the speed in knots. Okay, so this is the boat speed. We have the angle of attack, which is our TWA, so 20, 30, 40, 50, all the way around. We also have it being tested in different wind conditions, so 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. So as you look at the chart, the first one here is the 3 knots. So you can see that probably the best angle for speed here is between, I don't know, 90, 98 and maybe 105. We're getting the best boat speed here. If we go up to the next one, which is 6 knots, we can see that the best boat speed is probably between, once again, 90 and 100. But as we move further along, we can see that with changing conditions, that best angle or that best boat speed starts to go more to a beam reach. So we're getting, 120s here, 120 to 130, 130 to 135, and then up in the 140 range here. So how does that compare to the boats in Sailaway? Well, I've done a quick one on 7 knots or 7.5 knots here, and ignore this half of the graph. I had to do this in Excel. I've got in the red here is the cruiser, and in the blue is the mini. So once again, to compare, we're looking at about 100 to 105 seem to have the best wind speed or boat speed. Importantly here as well is that as you're bearing away from being in irons, obviously our boat speed increases, and as we move 30, 35, 40 degrees, our peak around here is about 50 degrees before it sort of flattens out a little bit, only increases incrementally. The big difference here is between maybe 35 or 30 to 40 degrees, and when we're going or doing some tacking, those angles there are very important. Now, why am I introducing this concept? Because when we get to looking at VMC and VMG, which I'll do in a second, we need to realize that as we bear away from the wind, our boat speed is going to increase, and as we luff up, it means that we're heading towards, back towards being close hauled. It's going to be our boat speed is going to decrease. So when we're talking about pointing to a mark on a map, we need to find that correct balance between what our boat can do, okay, and also the angle to the waypoint. And that's what the next concept is all about. Okay, so let's talk about VMG. VMG is velocity made good. It's really about the speed of the boat when going directly upwind or directly downwind. Now, to calculate our VMG, we're just using velocity times the cos of the angle between our true wind and the angle to the wind. Okay, so why is this important? Well, on directly upwind or downwind legs, this VMG can determine our optimum speed. If we consider some cases down here, taken from this website, in this case here, our VMG is 3.06 knots. Our boat speed is 4 knots, okay, and our angle is 40 degrees. Now remember back to when I was talking about that polar diagram. as you know, when you bear away, okay, in certain situations, your boat speed is going to increase depending on the polar chart. Well, actually, not depending on the polar chart, but depending on the design of the boat. So in this case here, at 40 degrees, okay, our VMG is going to be 3.06. Now, so let's imagine now that we bear away a little more, and in this case here, at an angle of 50 degrees, our boat speed is going to be 4.2 knots. So our VMG is going to be 3.34. Okay, our velocity made good. If we bared away a little bit more to an angle of 60 degrees, our VMG is going to be 3.25 knots. Boat speed has increased each time, as you note, but you are going further and further away from the direct downwind path. So obviously you are moving further away from the wind. So which is the optimum here? Well, in this case, it's an angle of 50 because this gives us our best VMG. And the same when you're in a race or whether you're cruising around, it's ideal when you're looking at a truly upwind or downwind path that you are looking for the best VMG in this case. And the other thing that I just want to mention here is that if you were at an angle of 90 degrees, you're never going to go upwind, which means that your cos of 90 is going to be 0. So you're always going to have a 0 VMG. Let's have a look at this in a different graphical way for VMG. The parameters are that we have 9 knots headwind, and I'm using the calculation here of boat speed, not speed over ground, and the cos of the angle. So in SketchUp I quickly made this diagram, and we've got 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and 60 degrees. I quickly checked the speeds that I would get for each of these angles at 9 knots. So at 15 degrees get about 2 knots, 30 degrees 4 knots, 45 degrees 4.5 knots, and 60 degrees 5.8 knots. So if you look straight away which one looks like it's more upwind, it looks like this one here. And when we come across to our VMG, we note that it is in fact the best VMG. So at 2 knots, travel that far, at 4 knots that far, 4.5 there, and 5.8 there. So you can see that in this representation here, you can see which one has gone further upwind than the others. So while obviously the boat speed is increasing as we go away from the wind, as we bear away, sorry, because of the angle change, we are actually getting less. So to maintain the same, you would have to be getting a corresponding larger increase in speed. Okay, so now let's turn to VMC, velocity made to course, which is our speed over ground times the cos of our bearing to waypoint, and our COG, which is our course over ground. So in this scenario I've set up here, we have a SOG of about 1 knot. Why is this? Because our current is about 1 knot and it's pushing us south. So if I put up the sails, actually let me put them up in course configuration, and I bear away a little bit, that'll be good enough. We can see that my VMC and my VMG are slightly different. Why is this? Once again, because our VMG is calculated with speed, our VMC is calculated with this speed over ground, which accounts for our current being different. Alright, so I've moved my my mark to be directly on my COG. So what I should be finding is that my speed over ground and my VMC match. So a good indicator here is that you should be comparing your SOG with your VMC to make sure that you're getting the optimum speed. Now obviously in long courses and long races, the wind and the weather and the tides change, or sorry, the currents change. So keeping this might not be optimal for that. But in the short sense of the word, for your VMC, try to keep it as high as possible, try and keep it as close to your SOG as you can, and you should have no real difficulties. Let's just do one last thing, which is imagine if we had a waypoint which is right upwind. Now this is also looking at our VMG as well, so they should be very, very similar or the same. DWD, keep on moving. And the best way to find your best angle is to use a method of dividing. So you would go lower, maybe an AWA of around about 20 degrees, and take a reading, and then maybe an AWA of 40 degrees. You could do this with TWA as well, obviously. And take a reading, and what you do is you divide between the two, and you keep on dividing until you find that best angle and that best boat speed that will give you a good VMC VMG. So at the moment our speed is 6 knots, our SOG is 5.2, we have a VMC of 1.7. If I change this to about 30, our VMC has improved a little bit to 3, and our VMG is about 3.2. So it's an effort of just finding that best angle. You keep on looking for different angles, and using the half method, going in, half between, half between, half between, until you find what is the best angle. Now, one note of caution here is that, or what you need to think about is that going in this direction that I am at the moment, in a northwesterly direction, is going to be very different from going in a southwesterly direction, because the current is going to help with our speed. So if we were racing, I need to be aware that I'm going to get a lot more speed in a southwesterly direction, but I need to be aware of the mark and which direction I have to go around that mark. So maybe I will be spending a lot less time, depending on the wind changes obviously, spending a lot less time, or a different angle. I could probably keep it at a higher or more pointed to the wind, or I might want to bear away a little bit more and get a little bit more speed in that direction, but it's going to take me a little bit more time to go over this ley line here, go over the medium line here, to get back to being able to go around that mark. And it's just something that you need to have in mind. Anyway, I hope that that's answered some of your questions about the differences between VMC and VMG. There is a lot more online that you can look at. VMG is a good indicator for upwind, downwind, whereas VMC is about your next waypoint. Okay, thank you very much and have a great day.